welcome to the channel. Hope everyone's doing well. I got a pretty fun video today that I've been wanting to do for a while now. I have a Dell Optiplex that I bought for $45, and I threw a bunch of different upgrades in it to make it basically a sleeper gaming PC. You can do the same thing as well and come out with a gaming PC for around $300 or less. I'll leave links to all the parts that I used or similar parts down in the description, because I didn't go out and buy these parts specifically for this. I just had them on hand, so if I can't find the exact parts, I'll just link something similar in the description. Let's get to it. We're just gonna have to do a bit of a free-handed action, but here's the computer that I bought for $45. You know, it has typical wear and tear. The back panel of it doesn't look all too great. There's the whopping 2 DVD drives. Another crack up there. Come around to the side. This panel's in better condition than the other one. So this computer for $45 came with a i5-4590, which is 4th gen i5, quad core, you know, so pretty decent. But it only had 4 gigs of RAM in 2x2 configuration. So I'll go over the parts that we're going to be putting into this computer, and then we'll get right back to it. To convert a Dell Optiplex into a gaming rig, you'll need 3 main things. First and most important is a solid state drive or SSD to put your Windows on. Mechanical hard drives are just too slow and unreliable to run Windows off of, and will cripple the speed and performance. What I'm going to do is I'm going to leave the 500 gig hard drive that's already in the system, and that can be a game storage drive, and this is a 240 gig SSD that I bought off of Amazon. Yeah, see, so you can see right there, 240 gig drive. A little cheap one, like $10-$20, and it'll dramatically speed up the computer even without the other components. Next up, some RAM. So this is DDR3. It's a Kingston kit. It's 2x4. This is just one that I had on hand. But something like this will cost you $10 to $20. It's not that expensive. And finally, you'll need a GPU. Now, older Dell Optiplexes have proprietary power supplies that can only power the motherboard and a couple SATA drives. So there's no PCIe power on the power supply that came with this Dell Optiplex. So you can go and buy for, I think, less than $10 one of these adapters. So it's SATA or hard drive power on one end, and it converts it to a 6-pin power, which is why I went with the GTX 1650. I have other cards like a RX 580 8GB on hand, which would be better performance-wise, but this has a 6-pin, which is the most that you can get out of a simple adapter like this. But yeah, this is a GTX 1650 that I've had on hand for a while. It's a gigabyte model, no backplate, pretty basic, 4 gigs of VRAM. And even though it's 4 gigs of VRAM, it's one of the more recent 1650s that has GDDR6. So that'll give you a little performance bump, but it won't change the fact that it only has 4 gigabytes of VRAM. With our GTX 1650, or 8 gigs of RAM, and 4th generation i5, it'll all come together to create a computer that can run stuff at around 60 frames a second. Alright, so here's the inside of our Optiplex. Not a whole lot going on. I already took out the old RAM and stuff. So first order of business is to get the new RAM in there. Like I said earlier, we're working with a 2x4 kit of Kingston DDR3. This is a 1333 speed kit. It's not the fastest thing in the world, but we don't really need that much speed for what we're doing here. So if you're not too familiar with computers, the RAM has a lock on either side, the top and the bottom. Some motherboards there's only a lock on one side, but in this particular motherboard there's locks on both sides. So you want to push those to where they're open. And you don't want to force the RAM in, because the RAM only goes in one particular orientation. So you want to look at the notch, and if the notch doesn't line up with where the notch is on the motherboard, you just flip it around, and then you see that now the notch lines up. So that means that the sticker has to be facing the back of the case in my particular case. So you just feed the RAM in once you figure out the correct orientation, and then just press on both the sides until both clips clip in. Just rinse and repeat for the other RAM. So if you know that the computer that you're working with is a really old computer, you may want to check the thermal paste. I've already taken care of the thermal paste on this computer. It was pretty dry. So all you have to do is take the cooler off, apply some new thermal paste, pretty self-explanatory. You can get some thermal paste for $10-$20. I'd recommend like Noxua or, you know, some of the more reputable brands, but you can get by with cheaper thermal paste, but I wouldn't really advise it. While lots of cases have you undo individual screws for each PCIe slot here, this Dell case, you push this and then it just unlocks all of them. And now we can feed in our graphics card easily, but it also makes some of the other ones fall, if you have to watch out for that. So I already removed these 2 PCIe slots, but if you still have some there, pull back this latch or undo the screws if there are any. Mine only has this latch, and then you can put in your graphics card. Make sure that the motherboard's in the unlock position. Unlike some other motherboards, this motherboard doesn't have a lock like the RAM, which means that you can just push the graphics card in, but some motherboards aren't like that, so you have to watch out. Some have a little latch like the RAM does. But now we can just push the graphics card in until it clicks, and then close this right here. I got the GPU in right here, and once the GPU's in, all you got to do is go ahead and find some extra SATA cables. So there's 2 SATA cables for drives, and then there's 2 for the DVD drives that are at the top of the case. And I'll unplug both of those, and I'll just use this to power the GPU. This PCIe adapter is just regular SATA, so it's keyed to where it only fits one way, so you just put it together like that. And then it just turns into a PCIe 6-pin on the other side. So you just plug that in, and then your GPU has power. Now for the boot SSD that we're adding in, there's already a SATA power cable there, but we need a SATA data cable. Unplug this from one of the DVD drives that was in the case. I don't plan on using any of the DVD drives, so I'm just going to use this as a data transfer cable for the SSD. So this is just a 2.5-inch, 240 gigabyte SSD, it's just a SATA SSD, and then I put it into this 3.5-inch adapter, so it'll fit in one of these sleds. You don't need to do that because SSDs, you can just honestly just have them laying, just chilling. But if you just want to lock it in and not have it move around, you'll need a little adapter like this one. And then you take it, and then you just kind of clip it into the sled. Once the SSD is fully in the sled, you can just put it in the same orientation with the other sled, and then it'll just clip right in. You only really need to put a drive in the sled if it's a hard drive. The solid state drive would honestly be fine just sitting in the bottom right here, but this is just to have everything nice and neat. Now the SATA power and SATA data cables on the SSD are down there. Kind of hard to see, but the cables are long enough to reach and plug in. Both the cables are keyed, so they only go on one way, so you just gotta make sure you're putting them on the right way. And yeah, with that, we now have our sleeper Dell Optiplex. i5, 8 gigs of RAM, GTX 1650, SSD with Windows on it, and a hard drive for some extra storage. But this should be able to easily pump out, high settings on some esports titles. So let's get to some gameplay. I'm not too sure what happened to my capture card, so we're just gonna have to deal with this. I have this computer back here just running OBS, but here's the task manager just to prove that this is the Optiplex. We have the i5 4590 with our 8 gigabytes of 1333 megahertz RAM. And way down here we have our GTX 1650. Like I said, this computer is here just to run recordings. This isn't the computer that's running the game. The Optiplex actually is, but it's down on the floor. Alright, so I'm just going to let the benchmark mode on Forza Horizon 5 run out here. Alright, so after the benchmark, we have an average of 59 FPS. It says right here that the absolute minimum FPS is 54, so we're pretty much in the 50 to 60 range, and this benchmark is one of the most demanding areas in the game. So for most gameplay, you'll probably see it stick right at 60 FPS. And that's on high settings, so we could probably go to medium, have it locked to 60 in the benchmark. But, that's on high settings, and I might even turn it up. I want to start off with some emulation performance using Cemu and running some Wii U games. So I have a list of games right here. So running Mario Kart 8 through Cemu with pretty much every single option turned all the way up. 1080p, ultra shadows, pretty much all the settings to the max. And we have it locked to 60 FPS. This is a 144 Hz monitor, but we're just running it through HDMI currently. I know it's kind of hard to see with the angle of the camera, but the FPS is way up there in the corner. So starting off, Wii U emulation is very solid. We have about a solid 60 FPS here and running the game at 1080p with ultra shadows, and every setting that can be turned to the max is turned to the max. So this probably runs better than the version of Mario Kart 8 that's on Switch. And at the top left, every now and then, it'll pop up that it's compiling pipelines, and it'll stutter the game a little bit. That's just it caching shaders and stuff in the emulator. And after it does that, once it won't do it again for that particular shader. So eventually it'll smooth out to lock 60 FPS, but it'll drop to like 58, 59. But once all the shaders are out of the way, it'll lock to 60. Getting a pretty solid 60 FPS right now. Yeah, jumping into Mario 3D World here, shadows and all the visual effects are turned to the max, and this is at 1080p. Anytime there's particle effects, the FPS does drop a little bit, but after the shaders are cached, after that, the very first time that particular effect happens on screen, it won't stutter another time after that. So you just have to play the game for it to smooth out, basically. But that's just how emulation is. This rabbit right here. Getting some pretty nasty stutters, but all those are starting to smooth out little by little. So Mario 3D World, just from the first startup of it, there's a lot more frame drops, but the frame drops will slowly go away over time as you play the game. But they're a lot more jarring than it was with Mario Kart, dropping into like the 40s. But they will eventually go away as you play the game more and more. But that's Mario 3D World running on our Dell Optiplex. So we have our shadow resolution set to Ultra, as well as the screen resolution set to 1080p. Inside, the game itself is capped at 30 FPS, so we cannot run it at 60 FPS, unfortunately. So I already have a save on this particular file of Cemu that I played on a little bit, just to get all the stutters out. So we're getting a locked 30 FPS. This is with 1080p with enhanced shadows. I have the shadows set to Ultra right now, but I think that you could set them a little higher, but the FPS would start getting a little jittery. But currently, we're getting a locked 30 FPS. I don't think it would matter what we would do here. Just run around a little bit. But yeah, this thing is great with Wii U emulation, and I am not willing to test Nintendo Switch emulation, but I feel like it would be great for that as well. If you want to get a gaming PC on a budget, this is absolutely the way to go. I only benchmarked a handful of games, but there are people who have built similar systems that have benchmarked tons of different games. I just wanted to kind of test a handful just to show it off today. A few changes that you can make, such as putting an i7 instead of i5. I upgraded the 4 gigs of RAM to 8 gigs, but you can also put 16. And put more storage, obviously. And I'm not too sure if there's a faster card that only has a 6-pin. I think that there might be a new Radeon 6000 card that only has a 6-pin, like the 6400 or something. But the 1650 is what I had on hand. All in all, it's a very good computer if you want to build a computer on a budget and you just want to have some fun throwing something together. Hope you enjoyed the video and I hope you found this helpful. That's all from me. I'm out. Peace.